Africa are found in DRC, because they are the ones who fuel the divisions in DRC. They are the ones who fuel the fight in DRC, and they are stealing the resources of DRC because they know there is no proper accountability for such resources.
Lucky. In other words, we are not doing well. And I'm going to be blunt at these functions. If you ask the chair of the African Union who funds the African Union, possibly 60% of the budget is externally funded. He who pays the piper calls the tune. That is the reality of the world. We must begin to pay for our own things in order to be understood and to be respected.
The French continue to micromanage all the countries that were their colonies, except the recent liberated zones of Mali and Burkina Faso. Comrades, the French are brutal, to a point that post-colonialism, they still make certain African countries to pay colonial tax to France.
Brothers and sisters, I hope you're all doing fine. Now, Julius Malema, the South African politician and Pan-Africanist in Africa, is calling out on Ibrahim Traoré and any other leader who is like-minded to join hands so that to unite all black folks around the world. Now, he is calling out on all African governments to pull out resources in togetherness to see this continent in greater heights. So let's watch this video, then have a quick discussion at the end of it. Thank you so much.
All French soldiers and military must leave the African continent, and this also should apply to neo-colonial military bases, including the African Command Center of the USA. We don't want the army of America. We don't want the army of France here. We don't want the army of anyone. We want African army on African soil.
Continent of Africa into spheres of influence. When colonization had lost its luster through a combination of certain realities and agitation from the continent, we regained our independence. But as John Henry Clark, that great African-American, said, we regained independence by mimicking European governance systems. And he rightly says, no African country will ever succeed on the basis of those systems. After that, the neocolonial project was instituted. And all of us will remember Kwame Nkrumah's book, Neocolonialism, the Last Stage of Imperialism. And he there says the most dangerous. We are now in a neocolonial stage when the European powers are at their most diabolical, when the Americans are at their most diabolical. And it's not lost on me that they'll be meeting in Hiroshima next week as the G7. And how do they interfere? They interfere militarily. They ensure that you in the military are trained in Sandhurst, are trained in West Point, so they affect your mind. They interfere diplomatically, sometimes through gunboat diplomacy, and that is why you see sometimes your typical European ambassador treats our heads of states in a condescending manner. They interfere through institutions such as the IMF and the World Bank. They interfere by ensuring that our economic infrastructure is beholden to theirs through dollarization. They interfere through education. They interfere by influencing our processes, by lending us advisors who tell us what to do. The neo-colonial project is alive and well, and it is at its most dangerous, and we Africans must smell the coffee. If we don't, they are going to continue to interfere. How else do they interfere? Through NGOs, Danida, CEDA, UK aid, US aid. These are Trojan horses that are introduced into our countries for the purpose of influencing our processes. And they infiltrate our institutions. Right now, if you look at the African Development Bank, look at the shareholding. It's Americans, it's Germans, it's Japanese, it's the French. And the Europeans have done their bit. They also interfere through post-colonial institutions, the Commonwealth of independent nations. They are not sovereign states, former French-speaking nations. These are the instruments that they interfere through. And how do we then deal with this situation? We Africans must now begin to recognize, and this was recognized as early as 1963, and the chair of the commission is here. They'll be celebrating 60 years in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And 60 years ago, on the 24th day of May, Kwame Nkrumah warned us. He said, if we are not united, they are going to interfere with us militarily. They are going to interfere with our economy. They are going to interfere with our agriculture. They are going to interfere with our health. Our duty, and I hope that when African heads of states and government meet in Addis next week, it will not be another jamboree at which pro forma speeches are read. I hope it will be an occasion to give meaning to Africa Agenda 2063. I hope it will be an occasion to give meaning to Africa Continental Free Trade Area. I hope it will be an occasion to revitalize the Malabo Declaration, the Maputo Declaration, the Yamoussoukro Declaration. In other words, we Africans, as I conclude, we Africans must stop operating in silos. Rwanda alone will not confront them. Burundi alone will not confront them. But if we go through the regional bodies and ultimately the African Union, we may indeed succeed in putting away this bulwark. And remember, it is no longer just Europe. There is a new scramble for Africa. The Chinese are here. The Turks are here. The Qataris are here. All of them are coming back. And the military bases that you see here is telling you that if you don't behave, we are going to use force. Sometimes I wish, and I'm saying this seriously, that we too had a nuclear weapon, because that is what Europe and America understands. The impact of European and American and Russian and Chinese interference is a raw wound. It is not something that is in the past. It is something that is happening as we speak. And therefore, when we speak to it, we are speaking to it to warn ourselves of the reality. When we speak about the Danidas and the NGOs, these are bodies whose raison d'etre is to ensure that we remain in a perpetual state of begging. That is what we are doing, to warn ourselves. And we are not for 1 minute saying that we will shut ourselves out from the rest of the world. What we are saying is that we must define how we engage with the whole world. And we are saying that as individual countries, we are weak, and the rest of the world wants to operate and to deal with us in our weak state. The United States of America are dealing with Rwanda on second-hand clothing. Rwanda cannot resist them. Burundi cannot. Kenya cannot. Uganda cannot. But if we are East Africa with a population of 300 million, we can. If we are SADC, we can. If we are ECOWAS, we can. So this is what we are saying. And we are saying further that going forward, we must also recognize our internal weaknesses. And what is our weaknesses? Chinua Achebe said it very well. The problem of Africa is simply and squarely one of political leadership. The rank of many political leaders in Africa are thieves. Let's call them by their name. They are thieves. They are individuals who are not interested in the interest of this country, And as long as we continue electing such individuals into positions of power across Africa, they are going to be manipulated. What then is the responsibility of the citizenry? The responsibility of the citizenry is to make demands. The chairman here, I hope he has received the several letters that I have written to him. I've written several letters to his organization, talking about the role of the African Union in peacemaking. I wrote to the chairman only last week about the situation in Sudan, saying we must solve our own problems. And I want to see a crusading African Union, so that it's not the Americans and the Saudi Arabians who are summoning them to Jeddah. It should be in Addis Ababa. In a nutshell, Joe, what I'm saying is that we have a responsibility to ourselves, both at the leadership level and at levels of the civic society. We must be engaged in a positive manner, and we must keep on shouting without being diplomatic, because diplomacy is lulling us into a false sense of security. And lastly, I want to say this. When foreign powers come, we must always be reminded of these goodies that they bring to us. It used to be said of the Trojan War that even when the Greeks bear a gift, they do not mean well. They never mean well. And the sooner we say it, recognizing the external threat, recognizing the domestic weaknesses, the safer we are. Right now, as I conclude, there is a group of experts going around East Africa, collecting views about the constitution of East Africa. I've just written to them this morning. They are leaving Kenya. If you ask 10 Kenyans, possibly only one knows they are in Kenya. Then they will be going to Burundi. If you ask your typical African about Africa Agenda 2063 out of 10, if 2 know about Africa Agenda 2063, you'll be lucky. If you ask them about the Africa Continental Free Trade Area 10, if 2 know, you'll be. In other words, Africa recognizes the need to define herself and to define her agenda. And I do not begrudge nations that define themselves and their agenda. Ronald Reagan once said it, and I agreed with him, that every nation does what is in her best interest. And I have no problem with that. The problem that we have is that at critical moments in African history, we have failed to seize the moment. You will remember in 1917 at the Champaran campaign, Mahatma Gandhi told Charlie Andrews, I do not want you to participate because at this point in time, the Indians must believe that they can do it themselves. In other words, there comes a time in the history of a nation when even friends of goodwill must be told, keep aside. We want to believe that we can do it, and your help must be surreptitious and subterranean if you are a person of goodwill. And the Champaran philosophy is what we must define for ourselves. In the year 2005, the former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair, put together 17 individuals in what was then called Our Common Interest. The report on the African Commission. The Prime Minister, he was then the President of the European Union, from which Britain has now left, and he was also the President of the G8 at that time before the exclusion of Russia. They produced a report. Right now, when I see the Blair Institute moving around Africa, they are implementing exactly what was in that particular report, and I have a copy of it, not for the benefit of Africa, but for the benefit of the Institute. And what they have done is to sugarcoat it and camouflage it for the purpose of hoodwinking Africa and for the purposes of creating an environment which benefits foreign companies to the detriment of the continent of Africa. So that some of these engagements are anodinal. They simply lull us into a false sense of security. Do I blame them? No. that is why I agree that we must decolonize all learning. I don't know who said it this, that if you have that the happiness of the slave is the comfort of the slave owner. And I am saying that if Africa does not recognize this, then Africa will never recognize and realize our potential. The saying goes that if you behave like grass, goats will eat you. And many times we in the African continent behave like grass and we are fit for eating. And that is what I'm saying, going forward in a strategic engagement such as this, it is incumbent upon the continent of Africa, and remember I said there is a new scramble, sometimes subtle, sometimes not so subtle. There was 1 month in this continent when the Russian foreign minister was here, the American foreign minister was here, the Chinese foreign minister was here, the French president was here, the Turkish president was here within a period of 2 weeks. What were they looking for? What is in their best interest? They engaged little countries. They don't want to engage the East African community. They don't want to engage SADC. They don't want to engage ECOWAS, because when they are big, they are not manipulable. And when on the 14th and 15th days of last year, the African heads of states and government were summoned, and I use the word summoned very deliberately, to Washington, D.C. After the president had spoken to them and given them photo ops, Africa was given 60 billion. 54 countries, 60 billion. And then the American president started engaging in bilateral agreements with Burundi, with Lesotho, with Kenya. That is what we are saying, that going forward we must be conscious. And as to training, our own Ngugi wa Thiong'o, in a book called The River Between, tells his lead character Wayaki, go unto him, learn what he has taught you, but bring it home and customize it for the benefit of our people. Learning is universal and defies geography, but there is wisdom in using that learning for our benefit. And very lastly, how do we distinguish the institutional conceptual West, which is diabolical, and the individual members of those countries that actually sometimes are on our side? Institutionalized conceptual West, as articulated through government, is fundamentally diabolical. Their pretension to the contrary notwithstanding. And therefore, when we engage with them, we must have our guards up. We are capable, in my view, of discerning who is better, and that is the duty of our leadership. Our leadership doesn't do a good job out of it, and that is why the demand from the civil society, the demand from academia must remind leadership at all times, you are dining, and I'm using this as a term of art, that when you are dining with the devil, you must do so with a long spoon. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. I don't know that you wanted to respond to the issue of definition earlier on, or indeed any comments that you might have.
Let us not drown ourselves in semantics. This is my view with due respect.
The French are brutal because some of their former colonies, their reserve banks are still in France. They are not in control of their own economy, yet they claim to have an independence. We, as progressive Pan-Africanists, must fully associate with and support all revolutionary actions of fighters who are removing puppets of French imperialism from political office and power. Not all these actions are revolutionary, because we must be careful of French-sponsored coups in Africa, where we think there is a revolution taking place in Guinea-Conakry, only to find that there is a French puppet who seek to replace those who were there before. There is nothing revolutionary about the Guinea-Conakry coup. We ought to separate that there can never be a revolutionary coup that reinforces French imperialism on African soil. Anyone who comes into political office under the pretext that they are fighting a French puppet while knowing they are the French puppet themselves must be isolated by progressive Pan-Africanists. All French soldiers and military must leave the African continent, and this also should apply to neo-colonial military bases, including the African Command Center of the USA. We don't want the army of America. We don't want the army of France here. We don't want the army of anyone. We want African army on African soil. The Pan-Africanist Institute should therefore provide ideological, political, and technical weapons to all progressive forces of the African continent to fight against colonialism. There is a political trend that is being accepted by African heads of state and government, where one country convenes all 54 heads of African states and government. The United States of America, France, China, Russia, and United Kingdom convene all 54 heads of states and government for a meeting, and they all go following each other like Casey and Jojo as heads of states to listen to one head of state, 51 of them. Sometimes they disrespect them to a point where they put all 54 heads of states of Africa in a school bus to go and listen to one head of state. What happened to these men? Because all of them, majority of them are men. What happened to these fathers who go and bow combined to one man? Even if he's Putin, why would they all follow each other and go and listen to one person? What happened to their dignity and their authority as leadership? They must have leadership qualities to know that Putin is equal to them, that China is equal to their own single country, irrespective of their size, because what matters is sovereignty. And if China recognizes that sovereignty, will respect the president of that sovereign country as an individual. We don't want visas. We want one currency for Africa. Because our currency can be more powerful than the pound and the dollar combined. Because London has got the biggest storage of gold, yet they don't have a single smallest mine of gold. Their economy is based on our minerals. And if we safeguard our minerals and protect them and say out of these minerals, we are producing a currency that is going to compete internationally, we stand a good chance. We need African Central Bank. We need African Monetary Zone. We need African military combat, because these pockets of wars that are happening in Africa are not of our own making. They are sponsored wars so that those who continue to steal our resources can do so uninterrupted as we fight amongst ourselves. So we need a military, a common defense system, the African High Command that will ensure the stability and security of Africa. We equally need a binding African court to deal with dictators who only exist in Africa to feed their friends and families. Those people must be prosecuted the African way. Sekou Touré and Emperor Haile Selassie prophetically said that the failure to unite the African continent will give rise to the neocolonialism, and that African continent will perish. The revolutionary Pan-Africanist ideological and political diagnosis of the future was correct. The future is here. 50 years later, we know that we remain visitors in our own continent. We know that our resources benefit Euro-American than our own people. This is despite most African countries gaining independence from colonial rule since 1957. Massive, huge tracts of land, our mineral resources, our animals, our oceans are still owned and controlled by the colonial masters. There are no countries in the entire African continent that have gained full economic emancipation and independence. And this includes Ghana, which was the first to lead the road. Till to date, it can't claim that Africans in Ghana own the means of production. In 2016 report titled The Neocolonialism reveals that there are 101 British companies listed on the London Stock Exchange that control an identified 1.5 trillion US dollars worth of resources in Africa in just 5 commodities: oil, gold, diamond, coal, and platinum. This is a very conservative figure since it includes resources listed by only some companies. Many companies do not provide the figures of the resources they control. And majority of these companies that do not tell us what they control and what they own in Africa are found in DRC, because they are the ones who fuel the divisions in DRC. They are the ones who fuel the fight in DRC, and they are stealing the resources of DRC because they know there is no proper accountability for such resources. The War on Want report on neocolonialism further illustrates that the fact that these 101 companies control and own the following key resources on our continent: 6.6 billion barrels of oil, currently worth 276 billion US dollars. They control 79.5 million ounces of gold, worth 119 billion US dollars. They control 699.3 million carats of diamonds, worth 134 billion of US dollars. 3.6 billion tons of coal, worth 216 billion US dollars. 287 million ounces of platinum, worth 305 billion US dollars. These are the numbers that reflect British neocolonialism in the African continent. I've not spoken about what French companies are doing. The Portuguese continue to play a significant role in the economy of Mozambique and Angola. The French continue to micromanage all the countries that were their colonies, except the recent liberated zones of Mali and Burkina Faso. Our leaders like their colonizers more than us. That's why they always seek after anything that looks like colonizers. I don't know if you'll regret inviting me after this. But my problem is that I tell my truth as is. And I say it to authorities without fear or favor. We must teach our people that we are not beggars. When we ask for reparation, we are not asking for donation. We are asking for what was stolen from us to be returned so that we can prosper and become a better nation.
Now, brothers and sisters, I've been talking about black unity. I've been talking about how black folks can come forward and unite and be very, very strong. Now, there was a problem in the last 2 years that Julius Malema didn't want to acknowledge the likes of Ibrahim Traoré. He was terming them dictators and calling them all sort of names. I think this came from a misunderstanding, and it is the fact that he was seeing maybe Ibrahim Traoré will try and steal his influence in the African continent, and maybe people won't be talking about him that much, or the media. So he was not so much okay with Ibrahim Traoré. We saw that a couple of times when he came out and talked so many bad things about Ibrahim Traoré. But one thing I liked about and I do love about Ibrahim Traoré is the fact that he is still young and vibrant, but at the same time very matured. He didn't ever reply Julius Malema. He did focus with improving the situation in Burkina Faso and so many other developments that he has been making over the years. Now, this is so good to see two Pan-Africanists coming together to unite. And one, like someone like Julius Malema telling Ibrahim Traoré that I salute you, bro, and I love whatever you are doing. Continue fighting the oppression of your people. Continue liberating Burkina Faso, and let's join hands and work together as one in Africa. This is whatever we want for Burkinabe, and this is the same thing we want for every other country in Africa. I love the fact that someone very bold like Julius Malema is coming out to address and say that, you know what, brother, I salute you, and I want us to work together to actually liberate our own continent. Now we have had Pan-Africanists before, good ones of course, the legends. But the problem we had in Africa, the problems we've had as black folks, is the fact that we've never united, and this is why we want to take this movement to a different direction. We want to do it in a different way. That in the course of uniting Africa, in the course of uniting black people, we must make sure that we, as the people, have a leader of which who we strongly support and of which we have his back, so that no one can come easily and take them down. This is the problem we have had in the past, that someone like Malcolm X was talking about black liberation. Malcolm X kept on talking how black people should unite and how black people should liberate themselves from the hands of the oppressor in the diaspora and from the oppression that they have been facing over time. But during this time, not a single person did stand with Malcolm X. Malcolm X was eliminated. No one, or actually people, the voices that were talking couldn't be heard because they were few. And the Western world kept quiet because they knew whatever they had done to one of our own. When Martin Luther King was talking about black unity, when he kept on talking about this, where were black leaders? Where were black people? When someone like Kwame Nkrumah of Ghana rose to power and he was talking about how Africa should actually be one country, how Africa should be liberated, how the African Union should actually actualize the fact that Africa should have one language, one president, and everything. What did they do? They overthrew Kwame Nkrumah from power because they saw the influence this man is going to have on this continent is imaginable. And the fact that Kwame Nkrumah moved all the way from Ghana to each and every, almost all countries in Africa, and he helped them to free themselves from the hands of the slavery, from the hands of the oppressors. It was so unimaginable during those times, 60 years back. So this is whatever we black people, we've been lacking. We've been lacking the spirit of unity, the spirit of oneness. This is why we want to preach something like Ubuntu. You are because I am, as a black brother. You are because someone else is. That you exist because someone else exists. You are able to do whatever you have to do because someone else is supporting you. That you don't have to do or to suffer alone. That someone can always come in and help you in a way to actually get out of the trouble that you have. I've been talking about some things, and one thing that we black people or we black folks believe in Africa is unity. That we have the togetherness to pool resources to help one person. And I think this is the actual difference with whatever is happening in the US and many other Western countries. That you've been taught selfishness, that someone actually corrupted your minds, that capitalism should apply everywhere. that you can't even go to say just hi to a neighbor because you believe that they want their privacy, that they should. You don't bother about some people, that a neighbor can go missing for months and no one even recognizes that, or someone can be dead but no one can recognize that because you people live separate lives, which is okay. But saying hi to a brother, knowing how they are doing, it's not gonna take anything. It's gonna take any of their meaningful resources from their life. It won't deduct anything. So this is why we say we must unite as black people. That we black folks have our own culture. We have our own languages, of which we've abandoned them to speaking English, to speaking French, to speaking Belgian, to speaking Spanish, and all these other things. So this is the time we should learn our own culture. African culture is almost the same from the southern part of Africa to the northern part in the Tripoli, and from the western part in Angola to the eastern part of Africa in Somalia and Ethiopia and Djibouti. So this is why we are saying, if we want to do things different, if we want to make this continent work, and if we want to make it great, I can't say that Africa was great, that we make it great again. We are making Africa great for the first time because we have had the chance to make Africa great, but we haven't made this continent great. That we listened to the Western media about Africa, that some people in the diaspora still think Africa is a jungle, still think that in Africa, people still eat bitter herbs and all that stuff. There are so many things that I've heard from brothers in the diaspora saying about Africa, and oh my goodness, I've never seen that. I've never heard of it. It's the first time I'm listening to it from you. So this is the fact that we've been painted in a wrong way, that they are the lords of good, and us in Africa, that the black folks are the lords of evil. So this is why we say we must change the narrative. And to change the narrative, just like Julius Malema, we need to know things different. That African continent, the African government must not allow foreign military bases in Africa. Let our own sons and daughters train in their lands and become military in their own lands without foreign military bases which spy on whatever we do, that take information to these Western countries that have always exploited, colonized us again and again. Enough is enough. This is whatever I have to say for today. Enough is enough. Thank you so much for having taken the time to watch this video. I appreciate so much. If it's your first time on this channel, please consider subscribing, liking, sharing, and commenting on this video. I love you all.